Dan Illman, Mike Beer, big Saturday afternoon of racing at Kentucky Downs, big purses, big fields, including this race. Here's race number 10, the Grade 2 Kentucky Turf Cup. We're going a mile and a half. $2 million is the purse. The number 2 Integration ran a good second last time out in the Arlington Million. Mike going to try to stretch his ability out to a mile and a half, and he's going to have to do it over a quirky turf course.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of talent, and he's going to get some speed to run at.
Yeah, he's a good horse, and in a lot of ways, this is a good spot for Integration, Dan. But it's not like there aren't questions surrounding this horse, who is a pretty sure price on the morning line and probably will go favorite in here.
We have the defending champion of this race back for more, and that's the number 4, Get Smokin', who took this race in gate-to-wire fashion last time out, and according to our friends at Timeform US, figures to be up and on the lead once again. But it may not be an easy lead. For a mile and a half, it could be a fast pace, because Segoy is one-way speed, and Balladeer is one-way speed.
Yeah, there's just plenty of pace in this race. I really felt like it was going to be hard for anybody to get to the front in this race and really get comfortable up there. We'll see how the riders decide to play it, Dan, but at least on paper, this pace is supposed to be pretty competitive.
The number 1 Highway Robber doesn't have the gaudy turf lines as some of these others in here, but I think he's interesting if he drifts a little bit off that 6-1 morning line. Ever since they've switched him to the turf, it's been one solid effort after another, and last time out they tested him. They stretched him out from a mile to a mile and a quarter, stepped him back up into the stakes ranks, and he ran pretty well in a race that didn't have a lot of pace. He kicked him down and kept going.
Yeah, I liked his performance last time. I felt like it was a real step in the right direction. He's certainly come back better as a 4-year-old, I think, than he was at 3. That's a good sign for him. The mile and a half, we'll see if it's within his scope, because that's one of the questions surrounding him. It's also at least worth pointing out, I know he was relatively new to turf and still very lightly raced when they ran him in the gun runner here last year. I don't know if you have an opinion on this. He didn't run that well in that race. And I don't know the Kentucky Downs had everything to do with it, but we've seen horses just not run well here, and that pattern sort of continues. So that worries me about him, but I do think he's improved as a horse this year.
It'll be first time Kentucky Downs for the 2 Integration, who's run into just one tough one after another on turf this year. The now retired supermare Warm Heart, when he had a very tough trip in the Pegasus World Cup turf, Master of the Seas, program trading. And last time out, the Arlington Million, a race that the pace kind of heated up on the 3rd turn, and he was able to stay in. It was interesting that Kendrick kept him covered up till about the 3/16 pole, eased him outside. Listen, he just wasn't as good as Nation's Pride, who's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, that was my take on the Arlington Million, too. He was second best in there. He didn't have any excuse in that race. There was never a point where it looked like he was going to win. And I know that Nation's Pride is pretty good, so maybe that's all you need to know, Dan. I still thought he was pretty disappointing in there. We'll see. I think he's the horse to beat. It's your call if you want to take a really short price on Integration. I'm a big fan of this horse. I'm probably not betting him here.
Well, Mike Maker did it again with the 3 Cathkin Peak. He claimed this horse for $80,000. He stretched him all the way out in distance, and this is what Mike Maker does. Cathkin Peak, somehow, some way, was able to shake loose through a 7-length lead, through 3/4 of a mile in a glacial 1:18-2, and no surprise considering that trip. He struts on home as much the best, but Maker knows when they want to stretch out, and Cathkin Peak has won from off the pace in the past. He'll likely have to use those tactics here.
The most interesting thing about this race, Dad, is that somehow Cathkin Peak got loose on the lead in here. When you look at his prior running lines and you see him showing no speed ever, real shocker that you can come to New York from California and get loose on the lead in a turf race. I would also put out, and all the Maker stuff is true, and the stretch out obviously helped this horse a little bit, but the Johns Call was a race that was crying out for a horse like Cathkin Peak to go to the front and put the boots to them, and that's exactly what he did.
Get Smokin' didn't put the boots to them in this race, the United Nations, but he went right to the front, and this is his game. They left him alone, but these fractions were solid, including the eternal splits. Tawny Port, who's chasing him in second right now, has been chasing since the start. You're going to see Grand Sonata try to rally from off the rail. To Get Smokin's credit, he's getting tired, but he's going to hold on in the 3-horse finish. I thought all 3 ran okay.
They did. And Get Smokin' has the advantage of, having already run really well here at Kentucky Downs, as you can, notice from his PPs that he won this race last year. So I guess that's a feather in his cap. If I'm being honest, Dan, I don't want the UN horses coming back in this spot. I like all 3 of them as horses. I just don't want them in here. I just point out there have been good also rans from the UN that have come back and run really well, but those were the horses that were stuck outside.
Right.
All 3 of these horses got to save ground every step of the way.
Yeah, one of those sources, the ninth place finisher, came back, upset the Sword Dancer with a front running trip, a 99 buyer speed figure. Up next is the number 5 Segoy, who figures to be one of the horses that could go after the 4 Get Smoking in the early stages. Last time out in the Arlington Million, they were on a mission with this horse. They went out early, they opened up a big lead, they just weren't as good. And I think this field is not as good as the Arlington Million, but still very, very competitive from a pace standpoint. That could work against this horse.
Yeah, I thought it could too. It's one of the things that I didn't like about him because it just feels like that's his running style. Whether he has to go that, super fast or not, his running style is to be part of the pace. I actually thought he ran really well 2 starts back going a mile and 3/8 because I thought that was a solid pace for the distance. And he hung on for second in there. He didn't run as well last time. I don't know. I didn't like the way this race sort of set up for this horse, but it's Maker and it's Irad and he's 20-1 on the line. I won't argue with that stuff.
King Krillin, the number 6, is cross-entered earlier in the week at Kentucky Downs. They've tried this horse in graded stakes company 3 times in the past. He hasn't really run to par, although his most recent start at Ellis Park was okay, resulting in a 90 buyer speed figure, but no match for Highway Robber that day. He's going to be a big price here, deservedly so, but maybe he gets the right race flow.
Yeah, maybe it does. Because if nothing else, in the most recent start there off the little laugh, I mean, if nothing else, Highway Robber got the right ride in there because they moved early into a pace that was rated, and they already taken that thing over around the final turn. This horse waited longer and then made his run maybe just a little bit too late. I don't know, man. He's going to get a good setup here. He'll get this far in distance, and he's just going to maybe sit back and make one run. That makes him kind of interesting.
Tawny Port is the number 7, and it's been a long time between drinks for this horse, over a year since he won the 2023 edition of the John's Call, which at least is notable because that's at a mile and 5/8, so we know distance isn't an issue. While he hasn't won, he's run pretty well. I thought he had the trip in the Monmouth 2 starts back going a mile and an eighth, and he didn't get it done, and I was a little disappointed there, but he ran hard every step. Chasing Get Smoking in the United Nations and was still trudging on at the end. Of the UN horses, I'm kind of interested the most in him.
I mean, he's to me, he ran his typical race there too. That I mean, this is a horse you can rely on to show up and run a pretty good race every single time. He doesn't win that often. I can't say, I'm a big Tawny Port fan, and I don't want to bet him in here. But I guess I would just wait and see what price he is. I guess 8-1's probably fair. Any lower than that, not interested.
I remember back in the day, he used to be able to sit behind horses and make one run. They've been more aggressive with him lately. If maybe this time around someone else does the dirty chasing work against the likes of Get Smoking. And one of those horses could be the number 8 Balladeer, who comes in from Southern California with a ton of early speed. When this horse gets loose and when he settles, he's very, very dangerous, as we saw in the John Henry Turf Championship last year. He doesn't settle very often, though, and that's worked against him. No excuse last time out in the Eddie Reed.
Yeah, no excuse. That was probably too tough for him, dropping back a little in distance. Maybe just isn't exactly what he wants. I still think you're left with a horse, though, who wants to be forward. There's other speed in this race. So that works against him. And I do think a mile and a half is still a little bit of a question for him.
7th place finisher from the Eddie Reed Gold Phoenix came back to win the Del Mar Handicap last week. He's a nice horse, 98 buyer speed figure. Anglophile is up next, Mike. I thought he ran pretty well last time out when third against Highway Robber. He might be a little bit class compromised, but at these longer distances, he will occasionally show up. And I think if you give him pace, he is a sleeper late running candidate to at least crack the single race exotics.
I won't argue with any of that. He's another horse that maybe waited a little bit too long in that last one, while Highway Robber did not and got on the move early and got himself involved. This horse didn't do that. He was along for third without threat at the end, but there's nothing wrong with that performance. With the right kind of trip, he could be there at the end. He's another horse who has already run really well here at Kentucky Downs.
While Get Smokin' and Tawny Port have been freshened since their United Nations effort, Todd Pletcher was pretty aggressive for Todd. He ran Grand Sonata right back in the Sword Dancer, and it was just one of those, again, New York turf races, no speed whatsoever. And Grand Sonata, with his running style, isn't going to make up ground against those legitimate Grade 1 horses with that sort of setup. Can you simply draw a line through that race and say he's going to get more of the setup as he did in the UN? I know you don't like the UN as a race, but that was probably his career best performance on turf.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, he did get to sit on the rail the entire way. I thought that maybe had something to do with it. But, you wanted Tawny Port out of that race. If I was forced to take one, I would just take Grand Sonata because I just like him as a horse. That I think he's very underrated. I've always thought he was underrated. He has proven that he can stretch out in distance, more recently for Pletcher. I don't care about the Sword Dancer. Those horses in the Sword Dancer, way better than these horses.
Chief Little Rock is the number 11. Now, he, of course, won't get a chiclet on the Timeform US pace projector because he's a European raider. but he's got a lot of early speed as well. I'm not sure he has this kind of early speed, however. He did win a Group 3, 2 starts back for Aiden O'Brien, going a mile and a quarter. And then I'm not sure if he was a rabbit, if he was just uncontrollable. They put him on the engine last time out at a mile and a half, and it just didn't work out. 4-1 to me is a little bit light, but if O'Brien's here, that means something to me.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's also the kind of field where maybe you're not that afraid to take the new face in this kind of race, because there's nobody to be afraid of it. I'm with you on his last race. I was like, what are they doing here? Is he setting this race up for somebody else? Because he went pretty quick and opened a big lead there and just totally threw it in through the stretch. I liked his Group 3 win two back, and I know that he accomplished that on the lead also. So maybe that's an issue for him, but he looked good winning that race, and it just seems like the kind of race that will stay all day.
Let's take a look at our top selections for the Grade 2 $2 million Turf Cup. You're going with Chief Little Rock for all the reasons you just mentioned. Is 4-1 too light for you, or do you think it's just right considering the quality of competition he's in against here?
Even with the quality competition, and I do think he probably fits well here, it's too light for him. I'm not taking 4-1 on this horse in this race. Ultimately, Dan, there was nobody that I could really get to. I went through everybody. I'm a big Integration fan. I'm not betting this horse as the favorite in this race. I do think he's probably the most likely winner, but I had to try to find somebody to try to beat him with. I wound up with a European.
I agree with you in that Integration is the horse to beat, is the most likely winner on paper, and is probably the best horse on a conventional track. What we're going to get from him stretching out to a mile and a half to Kentucky Downs at a short price is a different story, so I couldn't put him on top, although I think I probably would use him in multiple race wagers. I'm going to give Tawny Port one more chance. I think distance is okay for him. I'd like to actually see him settle back one more time. I think that Highway Robber is somewhat interesting with some upside, but I'm going to focus on the 1 and the 4 more as underneath plays. 11-2-1-9 for Mike, 7-2-4-1 for me. Grade 2 Kentucky Turf Cup. We'll see if Get Smoking can defend. Good luck.